I'm going to be so ridiculously honest with all of you. I did not want to do this video at all, but it was important for me to do it. Hi guys, welcome back to yet another video on this channel. My name is Lily, and on this channel I host a podcast and do occasional video essays, which is what this video is right now. It's a media analysis video essay, so if you guys usually watch me for my podcast, this might not be for you. Originally, this video was meant to be solely about Call of Duty Mobile, but I did not want to make another video just focus on Call of Duty Mobile. Not only did I stop caring about the storyline altogether and all of its uniqueness, but Call of Duty as a whole has a bigger problem than just uncreative campaigns. So let me take you through how this video will go. There will be chapters below so you can skip to a different part if you're not interested in one thing or another. But the first thing I'll talk about is just an introduction to Call of Duty and their history. The second thing we'll talk about is the racism, propaganda, and kind of weird stuff happening in the games. And then to end it off on a lighter note, I will touch on the repetition between all the games. And listen, if you don't want to hear me talking about the racism that exists within Call of Duty, this video is also not for you. My target audience is those who do want to hear about it, so if that's not you, or if you simply don't care, that's fine, you don't have to stay. Unfortunately, this video does need disclaimers, so I'll get into those. Disclaimer: I will be talking about all the bad things surrounding the United States military. If you are not in the United States or have not joined the United States military, then my critiques don't apply to you. Also, if you have joined the United States military or have family members who have joined and are proud of your service or their service, this video might not be for you either. I suggest you unpack all of the propaganda you've been fed before sitting down to watch this video. It goes without saying that this video will be controversial, but anyway, let's get into it. The history of Call of Duty goes back to 2003 when Infinity Ward released the first ever Call of Duty title. It wasn't until 2009 though that a story started forming. Call of Duty 4, also known as the first ever Call of Duty Modern Warfare, introduced a story to go along with the characters portrayed on your screen. Ever since then, every Call of Duty game has featured some kind of campaign or storytelling. Some of you might say that Black Ops 4 didn't have a campaign, but it still had a story in it, even if it was released after the game's initial release. The campaigns have attracted all kinds of fans, from fans who enjoy stories to fans who create fan fiction out of them. It's no wonder the campaigns are really popular, and even those that end up being hated by people are still talked about. But the campaigns aren't the only reason people play these games. There's multiplayer, battle royale, in more recent games, a battle pass, and skin unlocks. However, the characters featured in the campaigns gain tons of popularity. This is how we got a Modern Warfare reboot, and why the original Black Ops characters can't seem to die. But I'll leave that rant for the end of the video. Some of the fans that these games attract are military veterans, and that is by design. Though I will say in recent times, the target audience for the games has shifted away from military veterans and enthusiasts and towards women. But let's talk about the propaganda present in the game. As always, all of the links that I used to research this will be linked in the description so you can learn more. According to TotalMilitaryInsight.com, quote, military propaganda techniques have long served as influential tools in shaping public perception during times of conflict, end quote. And as technology has evolved, so has propaganda. It's a lot easier to reach people on a larger scale thanks to social media. But social media is not the only tool used to peddle this propaganda. Movies, advertisements, TV shows, assemblies at high schools, and mobile games are all tools used to convince the general population that joining the military is not a bad idea. You'd be defending your country and you'd be seen as a hero. Marvel movies are also a notorious tool for the US military. They often have military advisors who supervise the script and the final edit to make sure everything is correct. And listen, I don't mean to offend anyone who has someone who's in the military or who were in the military themselves, but a lot of the things the US military is doing are things that are absolutely deplorable. They have been for a really long time and continue to commit crimes against humanity, which is why propaganda is needed. When social media activists point out that innocent children are being killed by US soldiers, the US military needs something to convince normal, empathetic people that killing innocent children makes you a hero. It's why the new Captain America movie featured an Israeli soldier turned actor. Of course, the backlash was enough to make them refilm and recast, but this is clockwork. And it's important to understand that, especially if you come up from a family with little to no financial resources. I'm someone who went to American public and charter high schools, and I remember very clearly how soldiers would come to my schools and talk about the benefits of joining the military. And I was someone who heavily considered joining because of the benefits they'd offer. One of the ones that I was most interested in was the education benefits. I'm someone who loves learning, and I loved learning when I was younger too. My goal was to go to college, but my parents were and are lower middle class, so I knew that they'd struggle to help me pay for college. I mean, I never did go to college, but that has nothing to do with the money. But regardless, my point is that I heavily considered applying to the military for these benefits. Nowadays, however, recruiting is not as education forward. Like I said, technology has improved the reach of everyone. You can post a video and reach people from across the world, and so can the military. Their techniques have shifted from promising free higher education to promising an exciting, action-packed military career, similar to what's featured in Call of Duty. I want to show you one of their commercials and compare it to something from Call of Duty. This video is directly from the US Army YouTube channel, and it features a skull mask, much like Ghost's skull mask in the reboot Modern Warfare, and it overall is very reminiscent of Battle Pass trailers. The jungle, loading up the rocket launcher, the gunfire sounds in the background, it all reminds me of a normal Call of Duty Mobile Battle Pass trailer. In fact, let me show you the trailer for Call of Duty Mobile's The Hunt season. Both videos show off the weapons, both feature an explosion, both have an element of suspense and excitement. It's very clear they're borrowing a formula. I wasn't able to find an official ad, but I'm sure you've all seen those kinds of ads. Ads where the soldiers are sliding down a helicopter ladder, much like Gaz in Reboot Modern Warfare 2. Or ads where soldiers are running across the field to save their teammates, much like how Ruin had to pull Battery out of the gunfire that led to losing both of her arms. And you might not find anything wrong with this if you still believe that the military is an objectively good thing. Sure, every country needs some kind of protection. I'm not arguing against that, but in a perfect world, that's all the military would be. Protection, just in case. In the real world, however, that's not what the military is doing. Let's talk about all of the things the military has done wrong. Just so you know, it was really hard to research this because there are a lot of sources that come directly from the military and the government itself, which is going to be inherently biased. In fact, I'll show you an example of that a little bit later on in this section. If you want to look this up for yourself, I would recommend staying away from websites with .gov at the end of them and go towards websites with .org at the end of them. But this is just my recommendation if you want accurate information. And I'm saying this right now, but again, we'll get into it a little bit later on in the video. First and foremost, we need to talk about the betrayal to its own members. I have several family members who were in the military or who are in the military, and I've seen firsthand how traumatizing it is. The harm to your body is not just the extent of it. PTSD, drug addictions, homelessness, all runs rampant among veterans. According to endhomelessness.org, quote, on a single night in January of 2023, 35,574 veterans were experiencing homelessness, end quote. And of those 35,574, quote, 20,076 veterans were sheltered, while 15,507 veterans were unsheltered, end quote. Which means a little under half were out in the streets with absolutely no roof over their head. They're not in homeless shelters, they're not couch surfing, and they're exposed to the elements. I'm going to read a quote from the same article, which will be linked down below, of course. They said, quote, research indicates that those who served in the late Vietnam and post-Vietnam eras are at the greatest risk of becoming homeless, but that veterans from more recent wars and conflicts are also affected. Veterans returning from deployments in Afghanistan and Iraq often face invisible wounds of war, including traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress disorder, both of which correlate with homelessness, end quote. And of course, there are resources to help veterans out there, such as the VA, as it's more colloquially known. It's officially known as the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. I'm reading all of this directly from their website, which I'll have linked down below as well. They say, quote, if you qualify for VA healthcare, you'll receive coverage for the services you need to help you get and stay healthy, end quote. And then under the what care and services does VA healthcare cover, they say, quote, each veteran's medical benefits package is unique, end quote, and then go on to further say, quote, all veterans receive coverage for most care and services, but only some will qualify for added benefits like dental care. The full list of your covered benefits depends on your priority group and the advice of your VA primary care provider and the medical standards for treating any health conditions you may have, end quote. Already, to me, this sounds like each veteran or their family members will have to spend a long time on phone calls and in lines. And maybe this is just from my own personal experience and hearing how my family members have had to spend so long talking to the VA phone line and choosing to just not deal with it at all. But I don't know, the website just gives me those vibes. But I'm sure to others who have veteran family members with back pain, headaches, injuries, will relate to that. I'm sure you guys have seen how your relatives have ignored their pain just to not have to deal with long wait times. They'd probably rather go to a normal hospital than have to look up the closest VA hospital. And if you go on the VA website and look up locations near you, you'll see that some services are closer than others. So if you need both a doctor and a psychologist, you'd likely be traveling in two different directions. I myself looked up VA psychologists near me and got nothing. There are no VA psychologists near me. There are marriage and family therapists near me, but that's no help to people who are single. The closest dentist to me is 57 minutes away, which doesn't help me because I don't know how to drive and I don't own a car. So it's actually 2 hours and 45 minutes away by bus. The closest ear doctor to me is 12 miles away. There are no gynecologists near me, there are no urgent care clinics near me, and the closest eye doctor is 46 miles away from me. The closest caregiver support is also 46 miles away. And these are all services that if I were a veteran, I'd love to have near me. I would want to have a doctor that can check my hearing. I would want a dentist, a gynecologist, optometrist, and psychologist all near me. But they're not. They're really hard to get to. Even when I looked up primary care doctors in New York, a very populated city, the doctors were all over the place. Highly recommend you look up your own location and see how many services are near you and how close they are to you. But the betrayal to their own members is not just limited to the VA sucking and not actually helping as much as they should. I'm sure you've all heard of Vanessa Guillen, but in case you haven't, Vanessa Guillen was a soldier in Fort Worth, Texas, who was beaten to death by a fellow soldier named Aaron David Robinson. In 2020, he and another woman, Cecily Aguilar, were both charged with Vanessa's murder and are currently serving time. But this isn't the only case. Recently, another soldier was charged for the murder of another female soldier. Sergeant Sarah Roque was found dead in Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, after disappearing. A 21-year-old soldier has been charged with her murder after she was found in a dumpster on the same base, and this happened in October. In both cases, the families felt the military hadn't done enough to search for their missing loved ones when they were first reported missing. And this is a pattern. These two cases are not isolated. In July of 2005, PFC Lavina Johnson died on base in Balad, Iraq. Almost immediately, her death was ruled a suicide, and there was no further investigation done into her death. But there were a couple issues with the final ruling. When her dad looked at the crime scene pictures, he noticed that the gun she allegedly used to shoot herself, an M16, was far too long to realistically shoot herself with. Not only that, but it was laying too far from her body. When he brought this up with the investigators, they dismissed him and told him it was a clear-cut suicide. However, the independent autopsy that the family had to set up revealed that she had been raped shortly before her death, and the family was put in charge of the autopsy because the Army did not conduct their own autopsy. To this day, her killer has not been found, and there has been no change to her cause of death. But again, this isn't just an isolated incident. A study done by Brown University found that the majority of rape cases in the military was significantly higher than was reported by the Department of Defense. The Department of Defense released a report that said the amount of sexual assault decreased from 28.6% in 2021 to 25% in 2023, with approximately 29,000 reports of sexual assault. But Brown University found that the actual number should be closer to 73,695 cases of sexual assault. That is 2 to 4 times higher than the Department of Defense says they are. They say, quote, on average, over the course of the war in Afghanistan from 2001 to 2021, 24% of active duty women and 1.9% of active duty men experienced sexual assault, end quote. They go on to further say, quote, yet military officials have described how they prioritized readiness, or the ability to train and deploy troops to the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, over confronting a clear institutional problem of sexual assault, end quote. This means that although the Department of Defense has been working to decrease the number of sexual assaults, actual military officials prioritize training over decreasing sexual assault. The entire report will be linked in the description. It is 42 pages long, but the information I just read is in the first few pages. But anyway, this tells me that either the Department of Defense is hiding over 50,000 reports of sexual assault, or the vast majority of sexual assaults either go unreported, or those that do get reported are majorly hidden by military officials. And again, this is all by design. If the actual number of sexual assault was correctly reported and identified by the Department of Defense, much less women would want to join. But all of this is still not touching on the many different horrible things the United States military has done. There are too many troops being sent overseas and not for our protection. According to thesoldiersproject.org, the US military has about 750 bases in 80 different countries. A lot of you aren't ready to hear this, so I won't spend too much time on this, but a lot of the troops are sent to defend US imperialism, not us as individuals. If you don't believe me, just look at how many protesters were hurt when protesting US involvement in both Vietnam and occupied Palestine. If US involvement in those countries was actually necessary to protect us, people wouldn't protest it. And moreover, police wouldn't try so hard to stop the protests. This also doesn't touch on the institutionalized racism that troops face. I have an Afro-Latino uncle who was in the military, and one of my cousins married a Taiwanese soldier, so I've heard a ton about how both have faced racism inside and outside the military. And again, they're not isolated cases. But back to the propaganda part of this video. Games like Call of Duty and movies like the ones produced by Marvel serve to make you forget about all of this. I found this really interesting article by usc.edu that talks about how war games aid in military propaganda. I'm going to quote a few things from this article, but like I've said throughout the video, the article will be linked below if you want to read more. The first thing I want to quote is, quote, video games also have an important role to play in the military entertainment complex as well as the normalization of gun culture. Although games are not directly responsible for violence, they reflect a culture deeply invested in it. End quote. Of course, as the article points out, first-person shooter games like Call of Duty have to have guns. That's kind of the whole point. But they also point out, quote, initially, FPS games featured entirely fictional guns. However, as the genre evolved, developers started incorporating real-world gun models into their games. They soon discovered that using the names and likenesses of these guns without permission violated intellectual property laws. To address this, developers opted to create fictional weapons. Yet for many games aiming for realism or a military theme, fabricating weapons wasn't a suitable approach. Consequently, much like the relationship between Hollywood and the Department of Defense is, the gaming industry began forming mutually beneficial agreements directly with firearm manufacturers, end quote. When talking about Call of Duty specifically, they pointed out that Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 simplified reality. They're talking about the opening scene in the campaign where Ghost launches a missile to eliminate a leader of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They point out that Ghorbrani has a striking resemblance to real-life Qasem Soleimani, who was an Iranian military official and served in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. They say, quote, specifically, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 fails to provide players with a choice in carrying out the assassination, and it also fails to have them consider the geopolitical consequences behind taking such actions. Thus, it insinuates that the assassination was necessary for the sake of national security, regardless of the complicated reality behind such events. It discourages critical thinking about the player's role and the broader implications of military actions, promoting a simplified perspective on the assassination of Soleimani under the guise of fiction, end quote. That, and taking into consideration when the games were released, points to a clear position of xenophobia of Arab people, which is very dangerous considering what's happening right now in both Palestine and Lebanon. And that leads us to the racism present in the Call of Duty games. Now, forgive me, I don't have any articles I can specifically link to for these next few minutes, but many others have pointed this out, and you can probably find it if you were to play the games. However, if I do find any articles related to racism in Call of Duty, I will have them linked in the description. One of the titular characters of Modern Warfare is Kyle Gaz Garrick, a black character who has been there since the original games. I do just want to say really quickly that the original Gaz was white or light skin, so it's not the exact same character, but still Gaz. But in recent times, he's been slowly pushed out of promotional content. He was featured in the campaigns, but in updates and promotional content, he is nowhere to be found, and is instead being replaced by Farah. Farah is Arab, but her design has changed from having her wear a hijab in the 2019 Modern Warfare reboot to suddenly not wearing a hijab. This happens in media when the creators want their Western audience to see an Arab character as the good guy. I am jumping in here just to say that I know that individual practices across Islam differ, and so sometimes you do wear a hijab, sometimes you don't. It really depends on what you want to do. Nobody's forcing you to wear a hijab. However, this reads as less of an educated take on Islam and more as just a typical, oh, well, we want the audience to see her as the good woman in this particular scene, so we are having her show her hair. Versus, oh, in this scene she's a little more antagonistic, so we're having her wear her hijab, that kind of thing. But that is my own personal opinion. If you are Muslim, you will have to let me know how you feel about this. It happens in Iron Man 1, and once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. And I'm already hearing some of you guys bringing up, well, Roach is also no longer in the Modern Warfare games. but there is a pattern to Call of Duty deleting or erasing or changing their characters of color, which is what I will talk about a little bit more here. Bear with me, okay? Have patience. Like I said, this isn't just limited to Modern Warfare. I think I've said this before on my TikTok, but Call of Duty Black Ops 3 and 4 had some of the most diverse characters, which is why I gravitated towards it so much. Black Ops 3 was the first, if I recall correctly, game to feature a canonically and openly queer woman in their campaign. If you're not sure who I'm talking about, it's one of the captains that player falls in love with, and she falls in love with player regardless of what gender they choose to be. So if you play the game and you choose to be a woman, that captain is going to fall in love with you. But if you choose to be a man, that captain is also going to fall in love with you. Reboot Modern Warfare 2 then followed up with that when they made Laswell talk about her wife. But aside from the openly queer woman in Black Ops 3, they also had a Brazilian woman who looked like a Latina. Granted, she's a light-skinned Latina, but a Latina where if she told you, I'm Latina, you'd believe her. They also featured a Colombian man who also, again, looks Latino. I'm harping so much on their looks for a reason, so stay with me again. Aside from both Latinos, they also feature 2 Asian characters, both of which are from Singapore. They also feature a black man with dreads, and aside from that, there's also 2 characters that are queer-coded, even though they're not openly queer, but, I can read between the lines. And no, this isn't a lot in the grand scheme of things, it's actually the bare minimum, but it is a whole lot more diverse than all the other games, including recent ones. It went from that to slowly erasing the only black character or character of color from the main team, that being the 141. I've also talked about this before on my TikTok. In fact, I'm going to show you the 2 TikToks I've filmed regarding this right now so you can further understand what I'm trying to say.
I think if you were to ask me, Lily, who is your favorite character in the entire Call of Duty universe, I would have to, without a doubt, say Alessandra Castillo, otherwise known as Outrider. First of all, Lorena, her voice actress, did an amazing job, but second of all, she's the first Latina that I came across in the game who actually was Latina. Like, her accent, her mannerisms, the way she spoke, everything was just so Latina about her. And by the way, if you didn't know, she's Brazilian, so Latina. But another thing that absolutely just captured my attention was the fact that she had curly hair. It's so beautiful to see another Latina with curly hair. I have curly hair, if you didn't know. Now, her story is that she was an orphan who grew up on the streets of Brazil. She grew up in the favela. She doesn't know who her parents are. Her story is very, very unique to her. She is a Brazilian woman who was orphaned and who grew up with nuns and grew up on the favela streets. So you can imagine my surprise when I realized Siren from Call of Duty Mobile had the exact same storyline. Now, Siren, if you didn't know, is also supposed to be Brazilian. However, her original story was that she was a robot created in a lab and trained in the jungles of Brazil. That's how I was able to kind of be like, okay, she's Brazilian, but she's actually a robot. This is why she looks so white. However, the new Call of Duty Mobile writer team came in and, as per usual, fucked everything up. Now, if for some reason you still haven't watched my YouTube video where I go in depth about how I feel like this is a new writer team, you definitely need to go watch it. But essentially, to me, this new writer team showed up in sometime in 2021 and just destroyed everything that the previous writers had already built up. So whereas the previous Call of Duty Mobile team had an idea as to why Siren looked the way she did, this new Call of Duty Mobile writing team did not. They decided, hey, remember Outrider? Why don't we just steal her story? Real, representative Latina who has the accent, has the looks, has the hair. We're just gonna steal her story and give it to a very whitewashed Latina. They did a similar thing with Scylla. Now, Scylla, she was more of a white-looking Latina, but she still had some Latina features about her that I felt like I was able to recognize and identify with. You know, her skin tone was very similar to mine. However, with this new Call of Duty Mobile writing team, they completely changed that. They took that away from her, and they bleached her skin. Now, if you were to ask me, well, Lily, what do you think this is? Why do you think they're doing all these changes? I would have to tell you, I genuinely don't know the answer to that. Because if they were trying to sexualize these women, why would they turn Siren into a human? If they were, in fact, trying to sexualize their female operators, why make Alias look like that? I said this in my YouTube video, but why would they make Alias look like that? If they were trying to sexualize every single character, you know, I've asked, they all can agree, Alias looks better and prettier and even sexier with her previous looks. So why would they change Alias? I think a more plausible explanation for me would be that these new writers came in and wanted to make their characters their own. So they very drastically changed existing characters so that they would feel more aligned with the new writers' vision. I think that's why all the representation that we had previously has gone down the drain. For example, in Black Ops 4, you had Seraph, who was Chinese, but she wasn't a whitewashed Chinese. She was a realistic-looking Chinese woman with darker skin. You had Outrider, who had very, very Latina-looking features. I mean, her features were stunning. And although she did have lighter skin, you could still tell that she was Latina, not only with her accent, but also with her features. I mean, you had Crash, Nomad, Prophet, all of these who were very proud people of color and who looked like they were people of color. But now in Call of Duty Mobile, you have whitewashed characters. You have representation, but it's all been whitewashed and easily digestible to the white audience. Instead of having that darker-skinned Asian representation, you now have operators who look like K-pop idols whose skin has been bleached. I think this is a very prevalent issue, and an issue that Black Ops 4 and Black Ops 3 were trying to work around. Obviously, you know, they could have done a better job with making some of the main characters of the campaign people of color, but it did look like they were trying, and this was before people started asking for representation. They had already implemented that representation, not only with queer representation with battery and player, but also with people of color. People of color being proud of being people of color. You know, you have Outrider who swears in her native language, who speaks in her native language at times, but Call of Duty Mobile has just taken that away completely. Whereas before I felt like I could identify myself in Outrider, I no longer can because she's not being used and her storyline was stolen for a whitewashed character. And as much as I love Siren and the idea behind her, I still think she's very whitewashed, and I hate the fact that Outrider's story, who I could identify with as a Latina with curly hair, was stolen and given to her. It's just not something that I want to see anymore. I think that's also an important factor that they're missing out on, is having their players being able to relate and see themselves in the characters that they're trying to sell. If that no longer is able to happen because of how whitewashed every character has become, they're going to lose out on sales. And I've seen this already with whitewashed Scylla. I've seen more pre-whitewashed Scylla skins in the game than whitewashed Scylla. And I just think that's very telling that players don't really want whitewashed characters. We just want characters who look good and who are able to represent us. Anyway, please do let me know what you think, not only of this issue, but any other issue that you have seen pop up recently with Call of Duty Mobile. So when I filmed that video, I did not really articulate some of the things I wanted to say too well, so I thought I would do a part 2 and continue on with the explanations. So I brought up the point that, you know, sometimes companies, instead of opting for representation of black people, they will opt for representation of people of color who more so have more of a proximity to whiteness than other races, which is why you will see companies opt for black representation in the way of light-skinned black people instead of dark-skinned black people. But I didn't really articulate my thoughts too well. I meant to say, you know, and add on to that, that this proximity to whiteness affects other races, because like I said, in Call of Duty Mobile, they're choosing to represent Asian characters, but not realistic looking Asian characters. They're choosing to represent Asian characters that white people are able to identify more closely with, instead of choosing the darker skinned Asian people that they already have, such as Seraph. There's more specific phrasing for this, but I am not coming up with the words to say this. I just barely was thinking about this and thinking I should say this in part 2, but I completely forgot now that I'm actually filming this. But anyway, towards the end of the TikTok, I also mentioned that I wished my phone keeps falling and I just saw spiderwebs on my window. So at the end, I mentioned that I wish that the writers and the developers of these games wouldn't be so focused on pleasing the fans, right? And that's because on Tumblr, the specific discussion that was being had was how the fandom was abandoning Gaz and how they were completely ignoring him. And whenever they were asked to write for him, whenever they asked for representation, he would just be given more like sexual things in nature, which is just problematic in its own right. But one of the posts that I read on there that inspired me to do this was talking about how fans were kind of going hand in hand with whatever the developers were doing, right? So if the developers and the Call of Duty Modern Warfare team neglected Gaz, the fandom would also neglect Gaz. And it just feels like such... I hate it. I really do. Because like I said, Gaz was always a fan favorite. He has been there since the beginning, and so it just feels so wrong that not only the fandom is forgetting about him, but also the writers, they're completely forgetting about him. They're pushing him to the side. And although Call of Duty isn't really like a storyline based game, they do have campaigns, and you know, in the campaign he was prominently featured. However, after the campaign, his skins are not being released at the same rate. He's not being showed as much as someone who is not supposed to be a main character, like Koenig, for example. Now, I do want to say that after I have begged and begged the Call of Duty Mobile developers to write more people of character in the comics, they have finally introduced Prophet. If you guys didn't know, Prophet was also a Black Ops 3 and 4 character, which I also asked the Call of Duty Mobile writers to write more Black Ops 3 and 4 characters. Weird, suspicious, but whatever. So they finally introduced Prophet in, and he is a black man. And though I am glad that the writers are now featuring another black character, I still think it's very problematic for them to whitewash their previous people of color who are not black. I mentioned this in another TikTok, but it really feels to me like the Call of Duty writers see race in just two different categories, white and black, and that is incredibly problematic. We still would like to see representation, not in just saying, that white-looking woman is Latina, there you go, that white-looking woman is Asian, there you go, you know, like, I don't want that. I want the women of color who look like women of color to come back. And I don't just mean, like, I want Outrider to come in, exactly as how the Call of Duty mobile team made her to look. No, I want her to come back with her Latina features. I want her to come back with her big nose. I want her to come back with her sharp cheekbones. I don't want her to come back with light skin, blue eyes, and a tiny nose. I'm not crying because of the reasons that you guys might think. I'm crying because I am frustrated, and I cry whenever I feel extreme emotions. Though I will say that this is an issue that needs to be taken way more seriously than it is. I am exhausted. I'm tapped out from Call of Duty, like, as a whole. A lot of the players who play the game wonder why world chat is so messy, and I feel like it wouldn't be as messy if Call of Duty themselves addressed their issues from within and started adding more representation and stopped treating people of color like they can just be pushed to the side. I mean, again, I will circle back. Gaz is a black character who was a main, prominent, important character to the original story, and the fact that they are just completely forgetting him is just so baffling to me. Like, that would literally be like Disney releasing Frozen 3 without Elsa. Like, that is how important he is to the story, and the fact that he's just not getting any more skins because the fans are not consuming him as a character is wild to me. Like, he should still be featured in the game, he should still be featured, he should still be given skins, he should still be in calling cards. Like, he shouldn't just be pushed to the side. Same with Outrider, same with Seraph. They shouldn't be transformed into something that is palatable to white audiences. Their stories shouldn't be stolen to be given to characters who are more palatable to white audiences. Call of Duty is not just made up of a white audience, they are made up of an incredibly diverse community, you know? And so it's just very confusing to me and heartbreaking. I understand that this is a military game and that they don't necessarily have an obligation to be politically correct because, you know, the military is not politically correct. I mean, they go around killing people, take land, etc. However, there are people of color in the military. That's not just a fictional thing, you know what I mean? And so I think people of color should not be treated like something fictional, something that doesn't exist in the real world. People of color are in militaries in the real world. I think that is what Black Ops 4 showed with their many specialists. Out of all of these specialists that were featured, only 3 were white. Every other specialist was a person of color, and to think that Call of Duty Mobile was released just a year after Black Ops 4 and took a lot of ideas from Black Ops 3 and 4 and took a lot of characters such as Battery and Ruin and Prophet and Outrider, of course, Blackjack. I just think it's very funny how now Call of Duty Mobile has stopped directly taking from Black Ops 4 and instead has started borrowing from Black Ops 4 and giving elements of the specialist stories to characters that are more palatable to a white audience. And I'm so tired of it, like, genuinely so exhausted. If I were the Black Ops 4 writers, I would definitely be saying something, and I would ask Call of Duty Mobile, either you stop taking my stories that I made for characters who resonated with the Call of Duty audience, or I will sue you. Like, I literally, if I were a Black Ops 4 writer, I would sue. And again, I'm not crying because, like, this is genuinely heartbreaking to me. I'm crying because, you know, I am an emotional person. Shut up. But anyway, let me know what you guys think. Thank you for watching.
Yes, I cried. Shut up. I was emotional that day, okay? So the racism in Call of Duty makes me wonder, isn't that to the detriment of the United States military? If you're actively erasing people of color from games used to recruit people into the military, you can't use that game to recruit people of color into the military. And I know what you're saying, but Lily, the military is racist. Yes, they are, but this is not the video for that conversation. However, in 2019, 17.9% of active duty men were Latino or Hispanic. 21.39% of active duty women were also Latino or Hispanic. 20.92% of active duty women were Black, and 16.94% of active duty men were also Black. I don't know, to me, it feels like if you wanted high numbers of military personnel, you'd be sure to include people of color in whatever propaganda piece you're doing. It also goes without saying that Black Ops 3 was released in 2015, before the 2016 Black Lives Matter protests, and before the 2020 Black Lives Matter protests that demanded more inclusivity, rightfully so. My point is, they didn't have to be asked to be inclusive, they just did it. But now that they're being asked to be inclusive, they're whitewashing already white Latinas. It makes no sense to me, and it's why I stopped playing Call of Duty Mobile. That and the fact that their story is just awful. It feels like it's AI and traced. Like, it feels like there's no point to it. Call of Duty has many, many flaws, but the biggest is definitely the propaganda and the racism. Honorable mention, of course, is the repetition. Like, what do you mean Adler's new skin looks like something Firebake would wear? Why won't you let Templar die? Why do you keep bringing him back? Why do we have to keep following the story of Frank and Woods, or whatever their names are? I don't care what anyone tells you, capitalism does not breed innovation. If it did, a reboot Modern Warfare would never have happened. And Black Ops 5 would be a true continuation of Black Ops 4, but I digress. That is all I have for this video. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you in the new year. Bye!